Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive today. We're going to be looking back at 1986.
Oh, wow.
To one of the most, significant nuclear accidents in history.
Right.
The Chernobyl disaster.
Yeah.
And we're going to kind of explore what caused it, the immediate impact, the global impact, and the cultural legacy that Chernobyl has left behind.
Absolutely.
And to help us navigate this complex topic, we have an expert joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Chernobyl is definitely a story that continues to hold a lot of valuable lessons for us today.
Please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more interesting stories.
Absolutely.
Before we dive into, the actual event itself, can you give us a little bit of a picture of what the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was like and the reactor that was at the heart of it all?
Yeah. So the Chernobyl plant was located in what is now Ukraine.
Okay.
Back then, it was part of the Soviet Union. And the reactor in question was an RBM K-1000, a design unique to the Soviets. What's really important to understand about this reactor type is that it prioritized efficiency and output over safety considerations, which unfortunately played a significant role in the events that unfolded.
So it sounds like there were some inherent vulnerabilities in the reactor design from the get-go.
Yes.
What was the specific event or test that triggered the explosion?
The immediate trigger was a safety test meant to simulate a power outage. They wanted to see if the reactor could still generate enough power to keep essential safety systems running while the backup generators kicked in.
That sounds like a pretty routine procedure for a nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
Was there something unusual about this particular test?
Yeah, well, this test had a history of failing, which should have been a major red flag.
Right.
To add to that, the attempt was delayed, leading to a less experienced night shift crew taking over.
Okay.
This combination of factors created a very precarious situation.
So we have an inherently risky reactor design a test with a track record of problems and a less seasoned crew in charge. That already sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened next?
Sure. So during the test, several critical safety systems were disabled to simulate the power outage scenario.
Okay.
Additionally, the reactor's power level was reduced to a dangerously low point, making it highly unstable.
Wow.
And this created the conditions ripe for what happened next.
Okay, so at this point, it's almost hard to imagine how everything's kind of come together to lead to this moment.
Right.
Can you take us through the explosion itself?
Yes, at 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, the reactor went critical, resulting in an uncontrolled surge of power.
Wow.
This caused a massive explosion that blew the 2,000-ton lid off the reactor, exposing the core to the open air.
I can only imagine the sheer force of that explosion.
It was incredible.
I've seen pictures of the exposed reactor.
Yeah.
And it's a chilling sight.
Yeah.
What were the immediate consequences of the explosion?
Well, the explosion released a plume of deadly radioactive isotopes like iodine-131, cesium-137, and strontium-90 into the atmosphere.
Wow.
These contaminants spread rapidly, affecting the environment for miles around and creating a serious health hazard.
And what about the people who are closest to the disaster, who are the first responders that arrived at the scene?
The first on the scene were firefighters, plant workers, and other emergency personnel.
Right.
Tragically, many of them didn't fully grasp the invisible danger they were facing.
Oh, wow.
They rushed in, often without adequate protective gear, unaware that they were being exposed to lethal doses of radiation.
That's heartbreaking to think about those individuals unknowingly putting themselves in harm's way.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about the conditions they faced?
Sure. So many responders experienced burns right through their clothing due to the intense radiation.
Oh, my gosh.
It was so powerful that the exposed reactor core emitted a strange blue glow, a phenomenon known as Chernobyl radiation. It was a mesmerizing but deadly spectacle. The responders who were drawn closer to this glow absorbed lethal doses of radiation within seconds.
Oh, that's an incredibly vivid and haunting image.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine the chaos and confusion in those first few moments.
It was a very chaotic scene.
And just a few miles from the plant was the city of Pripyat, where many of the plant workers and their families lived.
Right.
What was the impact on the town?
Well, Pripyat was a bustling community of around 50,000 people. It was considered a model Soviet city, filled with life and a strong sense of community. But in the wake of the explosion, it became a ghost town in the making.
So the city wasn't evacuated immediately?
No, unfortunately not. The Soviet government's initial response was shrouded in secrecy and a reluctance to acknowledge the scale of the disaster.
Wow.
This delayed the evacuation for 36 hours, which meant that residents continued with their daily routines completely unaware that radioactive dust was settling over their homes, schools, and playgrounds.
It's almost unthinkable to imagine A community just going about their day not knowing what's happening around them.
It was a very surreal situation.
What happened when the evacuation order finally came?
It was abrupt and chaotic. People were told to pack only essential belongings under the impression they'd be returning in a few days.
Oh, wow.
Of course, that never happened. Pripyat remains abandoned to this day, a haunting reminder of the disaster and the lives disrupted.
Right. It serves as a chilling time capsule of that era.
It does.
The Soviet Union's attempts to contain the news of the disaster clearly couldn't last forever.
No.
How did the rest of the world learn about what had happened at Chernobyl?
Well, the radioactive plume didn't respect borders, and it spread across Europe.
Okay.
Sweden was one of the first countries to detect unusually high levels of radiation in their atmosphere. This forced the Soviet Union to finally acknowledge that a major disaster had occurred.
It's incredible how something like a radioactive plume could pierce through that veil of secrecy.
It certainly did.
How did the international community react to the news?
The world was shocked and disbelieving. It was a wake-up call shattering any illusions of safety and control when it came to nuclear power.
Right.
It also severely tarnished the Soviet Union's image as a technological superpower.
This is all so fascinating and tragic, but we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover about Chernobyl.
Absolutely. It really did shake the world to its core.
And, in the midst of this global crisis, there were these incredible acts of courage and sacrifice. Tell us about the liquidators.
The liquidators were just this truly amazing group, over 600,000 individuals that were mobilized to try to contain the disaster and mitigate its impact. They were soldiers, firefighters, miners, engineers, everyday people stepping up to face unimaginable danger.
So what were some of the specific tasks that these liquidators were charged with?
Oh, they had some of the most hazardous jobs you could possibly imagine, clearing radioactive debris from the rooftop of the power plant, encasing that damaged reactor in a concrete sarcophagus, to try to contain the radiation decontaminating the surrounding areas. I mean, those were just a few of their responsibilities.
Wow. It sounds like they were walking into a radioactive wasteland.
Yeah.
What were the conditions like for these individuals working in the exclusion zone?
Extremely dangerous. Many liquidators received very high doses of radiation, putting their long-term health at serious risk. And it's really a testament to their bravery and their selflessness that they were willing to put their lives on the line to try and protect others.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom the physical and mental toll that must have taken on them. What were the long-term consequences for the liquidators?
Sadly, many liquidators suffered some severe health issues later in life: cancer, organ failure, psychological trauma. Those were just some of the consequences they faced, and their sacrifice really underscores the lasting human cost of this disaster.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the profound impact this event had on so many lives. But amidst the human tragedy, there was also this need to understand what went wrong. Can you tell us about the investigation into the disaster?
The investigation uncovered a very complex interplay of factors that contributed to the catastrophe. It wasn't just a single mistake, but rather the series of events and systemic failures that aligned to create kind of a perfect storm.
So what were some of the key findings that emerged from the investigation?
Well, they revealed design flaws in the RBMK reactor itself, a culture of secrecy and a lack of transparency within the Soviet system, and then also a chain of human errors that really exacerbated the situation.
So it sounds like a combination of technological vulnerabilities and human fallibility.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on the reactor design flaws and how they played a role?
Sure. So the RDMK reactor, as we talked about earlier, prioritized efficiency over safety. It lacked certain safety features that were common in other reactor designs, and this made it more susceptible to instability under certain conditions.
Right. And how did the culture within the Soviet Union contribute to the events that led up to the disaster?
The Soviet system at that time was characterized by this rigid hierarchy and a culture of secrecy, and this unfortunately discouraged open communication and the reporting of problems, so they weren't able to really address safety concerns effectively.
So a lack of transparency played a significant role in allowing these problems to escalate. And what about the human errors involved? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so during the safety test, operators made a series of critical errors, including disabling vital safety systems and violating safety protocols. And while these actions directly contributed to the disaster, it's also really important to consider the context in which they occurred.
It's important to understand the pressures and constraints that these operators were working under. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So the operators were under a lot of pressure to complete the test, and they may have felt compelled to cut corners or disregard warnings because of that culture of fear and obedience that was really prevalent within the Soviet system. And it highlights how systemic issues can influence individual decision-making, even in these high-stakes situations.
Right. It's a reminder that accidents rarely have a single cause, but are often the result of multiple factors converging. Now, let's shift our focus to Chernobyl today. What's the current state of the area surrounding the power plant?
The Chernobyl exclusion zone, which covers an area of about 1,000 square miles, remains largely uninhabited. It's a restricted area where radiation levels are still too high for permanent human settlement. However, it has become an unexpected haven for wildlife.
That's quite a contrast from, a bustling community to an exclusion zone teeming with wildlife. Can you tell us more about the wildlife that has flourished in Chernobyl's absence?
In the absence of human activity, nature has really reclaimed the area. Thriving populations of wolves, deer, boar, and even endangered species like the Przolski's horse have made the exclusion zone their home.
It's fascinating how nature has adapted and thrived in this environment, but it also raises questions about the long-term ecological impact of the radiation. Are there any concerns about the health of the wildlife in the exclusion zone?
While some studies have shown evidence of genetic mutations and other effects of radiation exposure in certain animal populations, the overall picture is complex. Further research is needed to fully understand the long-term ecological consequences of the disaster.
It's a reminder that the impact of Chernobyl continues to unfold even decades later.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the legacy of this disaster. Chernobyl has had a profound impact on our understanding of nuclear power and the risks associated with it. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Chernobyl served as this stark warning about the potential consequences of human error, technological hubris, and a lack of transparency when dealing with powerful technologies like nuclear energy. It forced the world to confront the reality that even seemingly robust systems can fail, and the consequences can be catastrophic.
So it was a wake-up call for the global nuclear industry. What were some of the specific changes that emerged in the wake of Chernobyl?
Well, Chernobyl led to a reevaluation of safety protocols, reactor designs, and emergency response plans. Worldwide international cooperation on nuclear safety was strengthened, and there was a renewed focus on transparency and communication within the industry.
It sounds like the disaster prompted a significant shift in how the world approached nuclear power. But the impact of Chernobyl goes beyond just the technical aspects.
Yeah.
It's also had a major influence on popular culture, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Chernobyl has been the subject of numerous books, films, documentaries, and even video games, and these works have helped to keep the memory of the disaster alive and to explore its various dimensions, from the human drama to the political and environmental consequences.
And one of the most notable examples of this is the HBO miniseries Chernobyl, which garnered critical acclaim and widespread attention. What impact do you think this series had on public perception of the disaster?
The HBO miniseries brought a renewed focus to the human stories behind the Chernobyl disaster, highlighting the heroism of the first responders and the sacrifices made by countless individuals. It also shed light on the systemic failures and the culture of secrecy that contributed to the tragedy.
It seems the series was successful in humanizing the disaster and presenting it to a new generation now as we wrap up this part of our deep dive. It's clear that Chernobyl's legacy is a complex and multifaceted one. It's a story of tragedy and heroism, of technological failures and human resilience. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Chernobyl disaster. It's been a somber yet incredibly insightful conversation.
Yeah, it really has. I think Chernobyl serves as a stark warning about the potential consequences of human error and the importance of responsible technological advancement.
Absolutely. As we reflect on everything we've discussed, what are some of the key takeaways you hope our listeners will glean from Chernobyl's story?
I think one of the most crucial lessons is the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
The disaster wasn't confined to Pripyat or even the Soviet Union. The radioactive fallout spread far and wide, impacting millions of people across Europe and beyond.
It really underscores the global nature of environmental disasters and the importance of international cooperation.
Precisely. It highlights how events in one part of the world can have these ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate location.
And it also emphasizes the importance of transparency and accountability, especially when we're dealing with technologies that have the potential for such widespread consequences.
You're absolutely right. The Soviet government's initial attempts to cover up the disaster only exacerbated the situation. It delayed crucial responses, it eroded public trust, and it hindered efforts to mitigate the damage.
Yeah, transparency is essential not only for ensuring public safety, but also for learning from mistakes and preventing future disasters.
Absolutely. And Chernobyl also serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of technological failures. Behind the statistics and the technical details, there are countless stories of individuals whose lives were irrevocably altered by this event.
Yeah, the stories of the liquidators, the residents of Pripyat, the countless others affected by the disaster really underscore the human dimension of this tragedy.
Their experiences remind us that technological advancements, while holding immense potential, also carry significant risks that must be carefully considered and managed.
So, knowing what we know now about Chernobyl, what lessons can we apply to our own technological advancements and how we manage potential risks?
Well, I think Chernobyl teaches us that vigilance and a commitment to safety should always be paramount. We need to prioritize thorough risk assessments, robust safety protocols, and a culture of openness and accountability.
It's about fostering an environment where potential problems are identified and addressed promptly rather than being swept under the rug.
Exactly, and it's crucial to remember that human error is inevitable. We need to design systems that are resilient and account for human fallibility.
Right, it's about creating multiple layers of safeguards and ensuring that safety is woven into the very fabric of technological development.
And beyond the technical aspects, Chernobyl highlights the importance of clear and effective communication in times of crisis. Transparency and accurate information are vital for building trust and enabling informed decision-making.
It's about ensuring that the public has access to reliable information so they can understand the risks and make informed choices.
Ultimately, Chernobyl serves as a reminder that technological progress should not come at the expense of human safety or environmental well-being.
It's a call to action to approach technological advancements with a sense of responsibility, humility, and a deep respect for the potential consequences.
It's about harnessing the power of technology while acknowledging its limitations and striving to mitigate the risks.
Well, this deep dive has been a sobering reminder of the importance of learning from the past and applying those lessons to the present and future. We've explored the technical failures, the human stories, and the lasting legacy of Chernobyl. It's a story that continues to resonate, urging us to approach technological innovation with caution, foresight, and a deep sense of responsibility. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of one of history's most significant events. We encourage you to continue exploring this topic and to engage in thoughtful conversations about the role of technology in our lives. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep seeking knowledge.